All right, greetings from the Dark Continent. Conscious Caracal here, or Adams Van Sale. And tonight I'm launching a new series on my channel, a culture series, where I'm going to talk to some South Africans that feel passionate about their culture, that love their culture, and want to talk about it. And let's see where the conversation goes. Maybe we learn something new. I'm going to have as many different of South Africa's myriad of cultures on. And but firstly, maybe I should get a disclaimer out of the way. This is not going to be aimed at talking to people that did their master's degree in culture studies or whatever. It's going to be a series based on rather getting the perspective from people that love their culture. So it's not going to be specifically aimed at talking to experts, but rather getting information from people that really have their culture in their hearts. And we're going to see what we learn and see what type of insights we get. So tonight's episode is not going to be incredibly alien to me, seeing as I'm talking to someone from my own culture. I'm talking to Ruan Goosen. And we will also be doing this episode in Afrikaans on my Afrikaans YouTube channel and alle errands. So to all my Afrikaans listeners, don't worry. I'm just keeping to consistent with the type of content I put on my English channel here. But this type of content will be available in Afrikaans on my Afrikaans YouTube channel as well, and alle errands. You can go check it out. So maybe just a little context before I introduce our guest. I wanted to do this series because I actually got into an altercation on Twitter with a foreign person that didn't understand the cultural, looking at South Africa through a cultural lens. They were just under the impression that all white South Africans stick together and all black South Africans stick together, and that's kind of that's South African politics. But and when I explained to her that culture actually plays a very big role in regards to, if, for example, in her view, my only concern should be the white race. But if the white race survives and my culture dies out in the process, I'm not going to feel like a winner. I'm not going to feel like I've achieved anything. It's going to be a very sad day. So I think this series will be mainly aimed at giving people perspective in terms of why culture is important. And that's why I'm talking to people that really love their culture, like Mr. Ruan Goosen that is joining me here today. He is the future author of Afrikaner Economics. So we're going to be talking about what he sees in his own culture and what makes it important to him. Welcome to the show, Ruan.
Thank you, Aaron. Thanks for having me, and I think this is an awesome initiative. So I'm very honored to be the first guest on your culture series, and I'd just like to give a shout out to the stylist who styled me and Aaron's tonight. I think it's very fitting.
We go to the same Afrikaner shop. So yeah, the thing for me is that if we are going to discuss culture, I think we have to get something out of the way first. I'm going to have you explain it. Is Afrikaner a synonym for white South African, as a lot of people in foreign countries use it?
No, I think the main reason and the great thing about the series you're doing is the emphasis you put on culture. And I think in the world we live in today, people see black and white. They look at situations through racial afrikaans and they don't look at the cultural aspect of things. So for me, Afrikaner isn't synonymous with white South African, because you've got lots of different types of white South Africans from lots of different types of backgrounds. And therefore, being an Afrikaner is different from being an Anglo South African or being a Greek or a Portuguese South African. So I don't see it in that way. I think the Afrikaner has a lot of traits that these other types of groups don't have. And so I don't look at it that way. I think there are lots of nuances that one should consider when you look at it that way.
So yeah, no, I completely agree. But I think that's exactly why I say at the beginning why I'm doing this series, because I think if you don't view South Africa through a more nuanced or more complicated lens than just a battle between white and black, it's never going to make sense to you. You're not going to understand why this one English community is not standing as easily or as logically as you would think with the Afrikaner community, and there's tensions that you don't even know why it's there. And as this person that I had this altercation with on Twitter just called me an idiot and said, you don't understand South African politics. But tell the South African that he doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah, very Dunning-Kruger-esque, if you ask me.
Right. So when you look at your own culture, something that you definitely have thought about a lot, I mean, we've talked about a lot in private about it as well. What do you think are some core values and ideas that really define the Afrikaner culture in regards to what forms the backbone of this culture's existence?
So I have a podcast and I talk a lot about this, and you should definitely go follow the podcast after this episode.
Yeah,
I'm joking, but
we did an episode there where I was the guest on his show, so you can go check it out. If you're not interested in his podcast, at least go check out that episode.
Yes. And so on my podcast, I talk a lot about Afrikaner identity. And culture plays a key role in identity. You know, it's a large part of identity. And for me, identity is made out of three key aspects. So for the Afrikaner identity, you're looking at faith, religion. This forms basically a large foundation of our ethics, of our morals, our norms. All of this stem from religion, and large part of our mythos, you know, our story comes from religion. So that's really a major part of our culture and our identity. Then the second aspect to what it means to be Afrikaner is our language. You know, we put a large, you know, we respect our language a lot. It means a lot to us as a cultural group. We're very proud of our language. You know, it's basically the thing that separates us from Europe is, you know, we don't speak Dutch. We molded and formed this language on the African subcontinent, and we're very proud of it. You know, if you speak to Afrikaners, you know, we love it when someone else speaks Afrikaans to us. We can express ourselves better, and that plays a large role in our culture. And then the third aspect, I would say, is heritage. We have a very strong connection to our heritage. We draw from our heritage for inspiration. You know, a large part of who we are comes from our heritage, and we're quite proud of that. So, you know, that I would say, you know, there's a lot more to Afrikaner culture, but I would say those are the three key aspects that make up what an Afrikaner is.
No, that's definitely the type of explanation that I'm looking for in this series, because the thing is, this is aimed at people specifically on the outside looking in, not maybe specifically in foreign countries, but people in other cultures maybe looking in, or people, for example, in foreign countries that don't understand what's going on. So I think if my guests can sum up their cultures in a very succinct way, as you just did, I think that's perfect. That's much better than me talking to some guy that did, for example, his master's thesis in Afrikaner culture, and him rambling on for 20 minutes that I would find very interesting, but it would lose a lot of the audience along the way. But I completely agree in regards to your three, almost like your holy trinity of Afrikaner.
Yeah.
I think our language specifically plays a very big role. You can just look at, I think Afrikaans is one of only three languages in the 20th century that reached a higher status. I don't know what the English word is for it, but a higher learning status, where it can be used as where it was developed to a point where it can be used as an academic language. Now,
yes.
Maybe more on that point when we get into language. For example, people might say that if Afrikaners just give up their language, it might be easier for them to create more allies or get more allies and friends in their fight for cultural survival. But you specifically named our language as one of the key points, which I completely agree with. But could you elaborate a bit more in regards to that importance of language, not only in Afrikaner culture, but maybe your view in the importance of language for a culture?
Yes, no, definitely. And I get this a lot. I mean, I get this a lot from especially English people who say, you know, English is the global language. Everyone speaks it. We do business in English. Social media is in English. All the movies we watch is in English. So why not just convert to English, and it's going to be much more beneficial for us for some reason. I'm still not sure why, but I think it's the way you approach it. I look at life from a macro perspective, and then I extrapolate it outwards. And um, a language is so important if you talk about development. So children grasp concepts so much better in their home language. um, you know you you can't just take a language out of the equation and expect the culture to stay standing just as it is. Idioms and stuff like this are a key part of what makes a culture. It's the way we express ourselves. It's the way that we transfer knowledge from previous generations onto our generation. um, and there are a lot more reasons why language is just like the glue that keeps a culture together. If you look at America, for example, you had Germans moving to America. I don't know what other groups you had moving to America, but a few generations on, these cultures started to adopt English as their home languages. And as time went on, their culture and their traditions and their norms eroded. They would have a parade every year celebrating their German heritage, but that faded away afterwards as well. So language is really the glue that keeps a culture together. It's what it's a very dynamic process, but it's really important in terms of maintaining and sustaining your culture.
No, I completely agree. And maybe to add to that, I think language also serves a very important role in regards to almost like a signal, where you mentioned earlier that when you speak Afrikaans to an Afrikaner, it's a very pleasant experience. You immediately have a lot more trust with them. The ice is immediately broken. So
Yeah.
I think there's definitely an element there as well, where when you speak someone's language to them, it's almost like a signal of trust. It's a signal of if you want to talk in a very primal sense, a signal of I'm in your tribe. I know
Yes.
the
Yes.
lingo, I know the idioms, I know the secret password to get in. So I think
Mm.
that's also a very important role. And I mean, we've written opinion, both of us have written opinion pieces on it. Afrikaans is the language of our souls and our hearts and our dreams and our prayers.
Yes.
And yeah, that's why
But
I'm definitely.
and just to add to that, I mean, I'm not just talking about Afrikaans here. I'm talking about all languages. In the current world, we've got this large movement of Anglicization. Uh, languages being eroded away because English is taking its space. So I'm talking about all African languages here. These are things that should be preserved. They are basically, they, like I said, it's the glue that keeps the culture together. And if we really want a rainbow nation, if we want real diversity, then we should maintain languages. It's so important for each cultural group to maintain and develop their language, because that really maintains cultural diversity and all of this. So yeah, just to add to that, I think not just Afrikaans, but I think all languages should do the same and be proud of their languages and develop it and speak their languages, write in their languages, all of that.
Yeah, that's why it's always nice for me to see when you hear a story about, for example, someone that did their PhD in Zulu or in Setswana, because that's what Afrikaners did. That's how we got our language to the point where it is today. And my wish is for the world's different cultures and languages to survive. I think it is people maybe on the right might even say that it's if they misunderstand that you're just parroting leftist rhetoric. But at the same time, I don't think you can really be a conservative that values culture and your language if you don't want that same for other languages and cultures. You don't want to see the world globalized. You don't want to see the world being taken over by one homogenous culture or language. I mean, that's antithetical to everything you believe.
Yes.
So I think it's a very important point that you shouldn't just care about your own culture, because you have to encourage other cultures to also preserve not only their cultural heritage and relics, but also to be proud of it. Because I think that type of mutual respect is the future. It's the only way you can be good neighbors with other cultures. Otherwise, it's just going to be one big battle from beginning to end. So, and then, well, that's part of what I'm trying to do with this series, to have people just be a bit more conscious and aware about the influence that culture has.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I just want to tell the listeners, I am drinking whiskey, and I know I look like an 18-year-old, but I decided to shave for the first time in a long while. So I am above the legal age. Just letting you know.
I see here's a question. Enjoying the chat, gents. As an outsider, I'm curious to know how you square I don't know what that word is, the pride in positive aspects of your heritage with the negative, like apartheid. That's a very good question. I'll answer first, Ruan, and then you can also give your input. So
sure.
My take on this is definitely, I'll keep it very short and sweet, because I think this is something that a lot of people encounter. They don't understand how they can be proud of their culture if it has baggage. Firstly, every culture has baggage. There's no perfect culture in the world. Every culture has atrocities in their past. But you should never conflate the atrocities of apartheid with Afrikaner culture specifically, because it was a political system. It's just like you can't conflate Nazism with Germans. It was a political system run by a specific political party with a specific ideology. So firstly that, and secondly, my answer to it in regards to, in a more broader sense, apartheid aside, is that you should take a Paul Creer approach to it. Vat alles wat goed is uit die verlede en bou die toekoms daarop. So take everything that is good from the past and build the future on it. I don't think there is a culture without evil. There's a culture without any atrocities or unfairness committed in the past. If you can find me that culture, I would be very interested to know. But at the same time, I don't think we can live in that type of guilt-crippled state where you can't move forward because something bad happened in the past done by people that share your culture. So rather look at the positive stuff from the past that your culture produced. The things like, for example, something that we will get to in this conversation, things like the main stories of Afrikaner culture. I mean, that's the Boer War, Blood River, the Great Trek. These are amazing inspirational stories, and I think you can get a lot of inspiration from it. Ask yourself the question, what good will you get from just lying in the fetal position and in a pool of guilt about things like apartheid, or it doesn't matter if you're Afrikaner or not, about the atrocities that were done by people that, for example, had your culture. I mean, that nothing productive can come from that. It's just going to incapacitate you. So I would rather have a very realistic approach to it in regards to firstly accept that you are human. Humans are inherently flawed. We are inherently sinful. So of course you will have atrocities and unfairness committed by people in your culture, as any culture in the world has. So firstly, you need to make peace with that fact. And then you have to ask, what good will it do if I feel guilty for things that I didn't even do, but rather just for people that shared my culture, or even maybe people that only on the surface claim to share your culture but didn't really share your values? Or are you going to look at the past, look at the great things that were achieved through the values that truly were achieved through purely the cultural values that your culture has and its beliefs, and build something with that and take inspiration from that? I think that's a lot more productive. It's going to give you a lot more peace of mind. It's going to make you healthy psychologically and physically, I think, if you approach it that way. So that's my take on it. Ruan, what are your thoughts?
No, I think you answered it spot on. I think, this type of question is really rooted in cultural relativism, and as you said, find me a culture that is been perfect for the entire history of the world. You won't find it, because there isn't a perfect culture. Everyone does something bad, and that's the story of the world. I mean, it doesn't help anyone if that culture then goes and has this feeling of group guilt, because that's exactly what we've done. We Afrikaners have done, but also broadly speaking, the entire Western world. Um, the Americans are blamed for slavery, and they feel guilty about that. That's really a large part of their political debate is about slavery. But then you go to the Middle East, and they had a massive slave trade, greater than the European slave trade. So obviously bad things happen in the past, but history is like a pendulum. Your culture is like a pendulum, and if you are going to go into the fetal position and cry about your culture, then who's going to stand up and build a better culture? Who's going to take that and make something better? So this whole idea of being ashamed of your culture, or not being proud of who you are just because it's seen as taboo, I think is a large part of why we are in such a mess in the Western world, or Europeans as a whole are in a mess, because guilt doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help the culture. It doesn't help the people blaming the culture. So yeah, I mean, you hit it on the head, but I think we should move away from the guilt from apartheid. Apartheid was very bad, but we don't know any counterfactuals. We don't know what would have been if we, the white race, didn't, or the Afrikaners or whatever, came to Africa. So yeah, just stop being guilty.
Yeah, no, exactly. For me, it's it wasn't. I don't think it was said by someone famous. I just read it one day. I think it was probably just someone random person on Twitter that said the sins of the West people frame the sins of the West as completely unique, but frame the achievements as completely mundane. So everything the West has done that's evil is very unique and very specific, but everything it has achieved, everyone has done it. So it's that's exactly what you're talking about there. For me, it's just if a culture does not have a right to exist and should feel guilty because of things that happened in the past done by people that shared that culture or claim to share that culture, then no culture on earth deserves to exist. Then no culture on earth deserves to be proud, and no culture on earth can be without guilt, like a constant crippling guilt every day of their lives. So, and I don't think that's going to be helpful at all. I don't think that's how God intended it, that people are just lying in a pool of their tears, crying about things, not even things that their specific ancestors, like their father or their grandfather, did, but crying about things and feeling guilty about things that people that looked like them did in the past. I think
exactly, and it's anti-religious to think like that, because we are fallen people. We fell from Eden onto earth, and we are born sinful. The original sin is there, and it's up to us to go towards logos, to go towards something that is higher than ourselves, and that's culture. That's civilization. So yeah, I think it's anti-God if you're going to be ashamed of your culture.
Yeah, and we don't believe in generational sin anymore. It's Jesus died on the cross for us to not have generational sin anymore. But yeah, Explorer says great answer. I agree. Dankie meneer. I'm glad we could get something useful for you there. So to get back on track in regards to what I wanted to talk to you about further, Ruan, is definitely so every culture needs symbols. Every culture needs. I think it's very important that cultures have a flag, or it doesn't have to specifically be an animal, but an animal or a flower or a bird or something that represents the culture, something that they almost connect their identity to. I don't know why humans just want that, and I think it is very important. Now, do you think there are any symbols specifically that the Afrikaners latch onto that are Afrikaner symbols, whether that be an animal, plant, flag, and this could be official or unofficial? What have you seen?
No, so just before this interview, I quickly went onto Google, and it was very sad, because once you type in Afrikaner symbols, you get like the OVB flag and all of these negative type of connotations that are put upon Afrikaners. And if this was a brand, then we'd basically be similar to cliques at the moment. Would be a very bad brand or a bad connotation. But for me, the official and the what I put Afrikaner symbolism as is the ox wagon or the ossewa. Now, this is a symbol used a lot by various organizations and by various parts of the Afrikaner culture, and this symbolizes how we want our self-determination. We we went into the wilderness out of the Cape, and we tried to find a place where we can determine our own destiny, and we were willing to go into the wild, and face uncertain wild animals and tribes and stuff, just to get our own self-determination to be with our own people. So I'd say the ox wagon is very symbolic of who the Afrikaner is, our mythos. And then secondly, I would say the powder horn or the kruithoring. It's something that was used. It was a horn that was used to put gunpowder in, and that's another big part of what it is to be Afrikaner. We historically we've been a very military people. We were forced to protect ourselves and to go into wars or conflicts with enemies who wanted to oppose themselves on us. We that's who we are as a people. We've been forced to do it, and it's a major part of our history. So I would say those are the two official symbols for being an Afrikaner, or for representing the Afrikaner. We have a lot of monuments as well. We have the Voortrekker Monument, which is an awesome piece of architecture. We have the Women's Monument, which was built by President M.T. Steyn after the English killed a lot of our women and children in death camps. We have the Language Monument.
More women and children died in that war than soldiers on both sides combined.
Exactly. And I mean, that's so representative of our heritage and our history. And then I would say lastly,
finish that thought and then I'll continue on that.
No, our last monument is basically the Language Monument, and it ties in nicely with what you said earlier about how important language is for us. So if you're in the Paul, in the Cape anytime soon, then definitely go check that out.
Before I continue, I just want to say hello here to Catherine Aquitine. She was one of my first subscribers on this channel years ago. So it's nice to see a lot of people are still sticking around from that time.
You can spot talent, Catherine. Well done.
So yeah, no, you're spot on with the symbols. I think I'll just add to there because I think the Afrikaners actually have, interestingly, a lot of symbols because we're such a diverse culture in regards to what people see as important. There's a whole tier list. So for me, interesting enough, maybe just a story before I continue there. I've heard from other Black South African cultures that so in their cultures, each South African culture has like an animal that represents them. For example, the Zulus are the elephant, and you can see that in the IFP's logo. The Tswanas have a lot of animals. I mean, our friend Wotan's tribe's animal is a vervet monkey. There's also the kudu. But not all, but tribes in South Africa view the Afrikaners animal as the buffalo or the
buffalo.
Yeah, the buffalo. So that's very interesting for me because it is a very appropriate animal for the Afrikaner. I think it's a very stubborn animal. It's an animal that's very dangerous when it's cornered. It's one of the few animals that if you wound it, it will actually come charge you down.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting that they chose that. But anyway, that story aside, for me also something that you mentioned there, the role of women in Afrikaner culture. I mean, at the Voortrekker Monument, at the foot of the monument there is a statue of a woman guarding her children. So I think it's not an official symbol, but it's an unofficial symbol, is that Afrikaner woman in the traditional garb protecting her children. I think that's a very powerful symbol. It's something that really pretty much symbolizes who we are in regards. I mean, the Afrikaner saying goes that the women and children went over the Drakensberg with bare feet.
Bare feet, yeah.
So I think that image is very striking in the Afrikaner psyche. That picture of the woman protecting her children. I think that's also a very powerful one. And
yeah,
then,
and
of course,
and today, like Steve Hofmeyer's, or I think it's Steve Hofmeyer's got the song, you know, "Achter elke man, behind every man is a woman." So no, I agree with you. I think
our culture has very strong, but mentally strong women, specifically, not only physically strong.
yeah.
But yeah, and I think lastly, maybe in terms of symbols, would definitely be our old Boer Republic flags. I think you are very well acquainted with the Orange Free State flag that's in your profile picture. I have a full color hanging here against the wall. So I think those are also very important flags. And those aren't flags with the type of baggage that, for example, the old South African flag has. I don't really have a lot of attachment to the old South African flag because I think it's a very ugly flag because it has the Union Jack on it.
I just wanted to say that, so you read my mind.
So yeah, but I have a very strong attachment to the Free State flag, the Orange Free State flag, and the full color Transvaal flag, because those flags are the flags that we fought the British under. Those are freedom flags. Those are very purely Afrikaner flags. The old South African flag is too much connected to a political regime. It's too tainted. It's not as genuine as the old Boer Republic flags. Those are genuine, heartfelt flags without baggage.
And they are the antithesis of freedom, you know, of ruling over yourself, of you know, self-determination, and that's why it doesn't have the baggage. Once you add all the other elements to it, then it adds the baggage to it. So no, I agree with you.
I like this very much. Boere is a taai mense in a taai land. So Boers are a tough people in a tough country. I completely agree. Let's see here. Gentle Inflatable says, please visit the Toll Monument in Cape Town. Yes, I will definitely. I'm no longer in Cape Town, so I can't just do it over the weekend. But I'll definitely do it again when I'm down there and I have an opportunity. So before we go on, I'm just going to quickly scan the chat if there's questions. No, so we can go on in the next one. So right, so I mean, we're pretty much the same age. We grew up in Afrikaner households. We grew up in a bit different environments. I grew up in a small town. I think, if I recall correctly, you grew up in a bit more of a suburb. But in terms of your family life, as someone that grew up in an Afrikaner household, is there anything that stands out to you? Was there a cultural element to your household? Was it part of your growing up, or was it something that wasn't really there?
Yeah, so I'd definitely say yes. You know, it was a Christian household. Grew up religiously with Christian morals, Christian ethics, and that played a huge role in my upbringing. You know, my parents encouraged me to do voortrekkers, which is like Boy Scouts for those who aren't aware. And that taught me a lot about my history, about my heritage. Taught me a lot about the outdoors, how to survive the outdoors, and you know, all of that. And then, you know, like just a short story. My grandparents lived in Lichtenburg, and they actually stayed across from the graveyard where General Koos de la Rey was buried. And, you know, as a child, my dad would tell me stories about the Boer War, tell me about Koos de la Rey. And, you know, I would spend hours next to his grave and just, you know, chat to him. And it sounds weird now, but, you know, that I remember that very fondly. I remember, you know, chatting with Koos de la Rey's grave, and it sounds a bit crazy now, but that really played a large role in my upbringing, and it really shows how closely to my culture and to my heritage I grew up. You know, I grew up in Gauteng, which is very much more culturally homogenous. And then in high school, I moved to Cape Town. And you can really see the difference between the Afrikaners and how proud they are to be Afrikaners when you cross the border to the other country. So, yeah, I would say that it's a bit of a bummer, because I think Cape Town it maybe lessened my enthusiasm for my culture, but I think that remained. It still remained, and I'm very much proud of who I am. It's really part of my identity, as I said earlier. So yeah, no, I grew up quite Afrikaans and quite Afrikaner.
Yeah, my experience was very much similar in regards to these, and I don't think this is the case in Afrikaner homes anyway. It's that there's not a list of values written on the wall. It's something that's kind of intertwined with your relationship with your parents or your siblings. It's almost like they are unspoken rules that you just know. It's instilled in you, almost like it's genetically rooted in you. But there's just things you know. There's things that and you don't realize it until you go to someone else's house that's not part of your culture. I mean, I realized this the first time I went to my English friend's house, and they just called their parents on their name, and it was the most shocking thing.
Yeah,
I couldn't wrap my head around. In my mind, that's very disrespectful. That's not what you do. You call your parents small pa. And you also don't call your friends' parents on their name. You call them oom of tannie.
Absolutely, yeah.
But it's not something that my parents had to constantly remind me of. It's something you kind of just being surrounded by people in your culture, you kind of get the message that that's what you need to do. It's almost like there's like I said, a invisible hand.
Yeah, it's unspoken rules, it's norms, it's traditions, and that's what makes a culture. I mean, those are the really nitty gritty parts of a culture that you can't explain because it's so minute. You can't define it, but that's really what makes up a culture. So yeah, no, I'd agree.
Yeah, we have a question here from onrehabiliteerbare Afrikaner. Hallo Andre, dankie dat jy ingeskakel het. Hy vra vir ons, watter rol dink julle speel digkuns in die identiteit van die Afrikaner? So his question is, what role do you think does poetry play in the identity of the Afrikaner? So I actually have an alt account on Twitter that I started a few weeks ago for MP van Wyk Lou. So you can go check it out. It's just at MP van Wyk Lou. But I actually made I think maybe it's in the back of Andre's mind because I sent him this tweet where I posted one of the quotes from MP van Wyk Lou about this. So I'll just translate it quickly. He said that just like every normal citizen, the poet also has the right and the duty to use his talents and his power that was given to him to comment on the matters of his folk and on his community, and to mix himself with it and to involve himself with it. And I completely agree. I mean, that's my stance. Absolutely. We need the talented individuals among us that have been given a God-given talent for language and for being an absolute wordsmith to really translate the soul of the culture. Because not everyone, unfortunately, can do it. There is a very select few people but I think there are more people than maybe that think they can't do it, but they can actually have a very good way with words. But anyway, I think that's the role of the poet, is that to use that talent to really put the soul of your culture on paper. I think that's your role. And that's not just your role. I think it's your duty to a certain extent.
Basically articulate the zeitgeist.
The greatest cultures in human history, all today, what do you remember about them? You remember their great writers and their great poets and their great playwrights. These are the things that last forever. That's beauty. That's objective beauty. So the poet has a very important role. So I hope that answers your question. Andrea, Ruan, what are your thoughts on it?
No, as I said, I mean, the poet articulates the zeitgeist. He articulates the spirit of the time. And I think me and you spoke about MP van Wyk Lou, and his words are evergreen. It's as if what he said, decades ago is even more true now. And I think that's basically the job of the poet is to really extract the sign of the times, the feeling of the times, and really sum it up in the shortest amount of words possible. As you said, poets, the most important leaders are forgotten, but the poets are remembered, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that, and yeah, I think obviously there's a lot of other roles in the society that are as important, but you know, we Afrikaners have such a rich history in poetry and you know, in our culture. So no, definitely, I think onreali what what's Andre's name? Onrehabiliteerbare Afrikaner.
Onrehabiliteerbare.
He's doing that job for us at the moment. So definitely go check him out. He's
Yeah.
he's got a way with words.
No, definitely. I always joke about how in the future Afrikaans students are going to be very excited when they cover him in their module.
I know I would. So
so yeah. So here's the hard question, Ruan. We're going to get to the either black pilling or white pilling question of the night, and that is, what is the state of our culture today? From your perspective, not from an academic perspective, not from like some geopolitical analysis, whatever, just from your honest opinion, from someone that loves his culture, that observes what's going on around him, and that has a talent for noticing what's going on around him. What do you see? What is the state of our culture today? And then you can go into challenges after that.
yeah, so this is a tough pill to swallow, and I think it's more tough pill to swallow for those who realize what's going on. I think there are a lot of people who go, Afrikaners especially, who go through life who are oblivious towards what's really going on in the Afrikaner culture, the degeneration of our culture, and the the eroding nature of our culture and our language and all of this. So I think it's, to give it perspective, I'm a born free South African. I was born after 94, and I'm the first generation of this Rainbow Nation experiment. And what's really evident in my generation, and perhaps the generation before me, or definitely the millennials, there's this large, as we spoke earlier, this large feeling of guilt. We are ashamed of what transpired in the past, and from inside our culture and outside our culture, you've got people telling you that your culture is to blame for all South Africa's troubles. And this has really put us in a difficult position, because a lot of young Afrikaners now, they can't be proud of their heritage. It's a taboo, basically, to be proud of your culture. So what's the alternative? Well, you rebel against your culture. You don't care for your culture, because what are you preserving? You're preserving something that was evil. And it's a very progressive way of looking at things, because progressivism and liberalism is basically destruction. It's destroying the old to make something new. You want to get rid of what happened in the past, and you want to create something new. And I think the biggest problem for my generation is the fact that they have not chosen to choose the Afrikaner identity, and they've rather replaced that with a South African identity, which is synthetic. And being a South African, it doesn't have those three elements I spoke about earlier. It doesn't meet the criteria of an identity. It's synthetic. It's not anchored in something. It doesn't have a heritage or a tradition. And that's the big problem for young Afrikaners, because they basically putting themselves in an identity crisis. The whole idea of an identity is to anchor yourself. It's to have a guiding identity and a guiding structure to go through life. And simultaneously, whilst they adopt this new South African culture, they are destroying the Afrikaner culture. They are moving away from developing our culture. And I think it's not just the story about Afrikaners. I think the entire Western world is having this problem, That's why I said liberalism has a lot to do with this, because you are adopting a synthetic culture that isn't your own. So what's the problem? Well, we're facing this whole dilemma. We're facing this identity crisis. We have this group guilt we are sitting with, but we're also facing a government who really wants to eradicate our entire culture, our heritage, our monuments, our language, everything from the face of the African continent. So I think that's something that Afrikaners or have that other cultures don't have, is we are constantly fighting for survival. People laugh about, the Western civilization is being destroyed. Afrikaner culture is literally being destroyed in front of our eyes, and we have to fight every day to maintain this, to conserve this culture. So it's a tough situation to be a young Afrikaner, and in that sense, it's a massive black pill. But
you need to try to just lay down and be blackpilled. I mean, the Boers in the Boer War could have been blackpilled. The Oaks and Blood River could have been blackpilled.
This is the point I'm trying to get to. Is you're really seeing a resurgence of young Afrikaners who are looking at this situation, and they are basically telling themselves, well, we can go along with this, or we can bloody well stand and fight and stand our man and try to preserve our culture, to build our culture.
So that at the end, nobody can say you didn't try.
Exactly, and that's something I'm seeing every day. It's people saying, the odds are stacked against us. We are looking at this impossible task that lies ahead of us, but we might as well give it a go. And that's something that really makes me proud. I see it every day, and I really think that I have a lot of respect for people who do that, because they, if they know it or not, they are standing for something bigger than themselves. And I have a lot of respect for people who do that, because it's something to applaud. It's something to really it's a good aspect or a good character trait for someone to have. So in a sense, we are battling and we are losing at the moment. But you really have this awakening of people and people who realize that, if we don't do something now, then everything our forefathers fought for, everything that they went through, it's much tougher than we are going through at the moment, is going to be lost. And I think, I'd rather not sit with that burden than actually trying to fight for my culture. So yeah, that's basically it. It's a tough time, but it's exciting. It's exciting.
No, that was an excellent speech, Ruan. If I wanted to make a really cringy YouTube title, it'd be very easy for me. I can just make like epic speech by Ruan Goosen on Afrikaner culture. But no, really, it was very well done. I just want to comment on something I saw in the chat. Rian Sali is here, and when you said the identity of South African is holding Afrikaners back, or I can't remember exactly what you said. You said it in terms of a negative sense. He immediately said, oof. So maybe to elaborate on that, for me, I look at this in regards to how Van Zyl Slabbert conceptualized this. He talked about the hierarchy of identities. So nobody only has one identity. If that was true, you couldn't be a Christian and an Afrikaner at the same time, or you couldn't be a man and an Afrikaner at the same time. So there's a hierarchy of identities, and everyone's is different. And it's a very long hierarchy, because there's an identity of you being a Gautenger or a Western Cape person, growing up in the Western Cape. That's part of your hierarchy, but it's very low. You'll very easily give it up. I mean, you gave it up. You were a Gautenger, you moved to the Cape. That was you giving up your Gauteng identity. So there's a hierarchy. There's things that you give up easier and things that you give up harder. For me, for example, I'll give up my South African identity before I give up my Christian identity any day, not even hesitate. So that's just an example.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. Everyone has an identity hierarchy. So there is no prescribed, this is what it needs to be. You need to try and understand why people have their hierarchies as they are. If we go down far enough in my and your identity hierarchy, we'll see things that don't completely match, some things that you value more than me. So for me, for example, South African is definitely not on the top of my hierarchy of identities. And it makes sense because I think a lot of young oaks like me and you, we don't get a lot of love from our South African identity. Firstly, your identity on a more psychological, abstract level helps you make sense of the world. It gives you a framework. It gives you a tribe. It gives you kind of a life raft in this very sometimes crazy or chaotic world. What does the South, and I'm talking not on in a practical sense, like your passport and whatever. I'm talking about in a psychological, abstract sense. What real like tools does your South African identity give you? What is it? Let's go down the list. You support the Springboks. You like to braai. You have probably a South African flag somewhere on a shirt, on a wall somewhere. You live in the economic bloc that is South Africa. You live in the vicinity of Southern Africa. And I'm running out of list things now. And none of those things really give you very concrete tools when the shit really hits the fan to deal with that. For example, if you let's look at something a bit higher up on both of our hierarchies, your Christian identity. That gives you tools. You look at, for example, the 10 Commandments. You look at the scripture. You look at the values in your Bible. You look at the thousands of year-old values that have persisted. And those are guidelines for you from written by people a lot smarter than you, and with divine intervention as well.
And withstood the test of time as well.
That stood the test of time. For the exact, you might think that situations that you are in now are very unique, and you're like, these are unprecedented. Go read some of the stories in the Bible and look at the dilemmas that they had and the things that they were struggling with. And you'll see a lot of these themes. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So, okay, I don't want to get into that because then we're going to be talking about it for another half an hour. But yeah, so there's an example of an identity that gives you very useful tools when the shit hits the fan, what to do. Afrikaner culture as well. I mean, not to get too deep into it, when we were talking about, for example, how we grew up, we talked about the unspoken rules. Those are there for a reason. Those traditions are there for a reason. They have a value. They do something to enrich your life and help you figure out things. So yeah, to end off my speech, seeing as it was my turn to do a 5-minute speech, for me, I think it is very important that people understand that every person has a hierarchy of identities, and they're probably not going to match yours. There are things that some people value more in their. I mean, some people, for example, have being homosexual at the top of their identity hierarchy. Some people have being a gamer at the top of their hierarchy. These people exist. And you need to try and understand that. You need to understand where that comes from, why that is, rather than saying, no, this is exactly what it needs to be. And if it's not, you're evil, or there's something wrong with you, or you are anti these other identities. So maybe a book or not a book, but rather a writer I can recommend is definitely Van Zyl that writes about this. And in a multicultural society like South Africa, it's absolutely crucial that you understand that you are going to have layers to your identity.
Yeah, and I mean, you can be whatever you want. You can be a South African in my eyes. Just don't force your South Africanism onto me. And as you said, it's up to everyone to determine their own hierarchy, but don't force your hierarchy onto me. Don't expect me to be what you are. So yeah, I mean, Rian, you can be a South African, but I'm not going to be a South African as well.
Yeah, but yeah, I see a lot of people actually know Van Zyl in the chat, so that's nice to see. Okay, so we've got some time left. Something that I wanted to get to that I mentioned earlier in the stream is in literature you call it the origin myths, but it doesn't mean that it's like a fake story that's made up. But it's kind of the stories, the legends, and the myths that form the foundation of your culture. Now, I mentioned Blood River the Boer War and the Great Trek. And I think you'd agree those are our three main stories. But is there one of those stories that stand out to you, or maybe do you think those stories share a theme that you think makes them important? What are your thoughts on those origin myths of our culture?
Yeah, so I think, those origin myths, I think in Greek it's the mythos. It's really, it encapsulates the spirit of the culture. And I think in our case, the mythos for the Afrikaner that really encapsulates that spirit the best is the story of Blood River. And it's a real story. It's not a myth. It really happened, and I think that adds a lot of value to it. But it's a story where the Afrikaners were in the wild, in the wilderness. They were trying to cement a place for them. Just get a piece of land, determine their own future, and they were with their backs against the wall. They had a large army that was going to attack them, and they, statistically didn't stand a chance. They were outnumbered, and I think this really fits into what we were talking about earlier about the black bull and how it's actually a white bull. And there are two things that the Afrikaner did there. Is the one thing, they stood together. They made a circle, and they stood together as a people. But that isn't enough. They made a covenant with God, and in the covenant with God, they said, God, if you protect us today against this enemy, then we will have a Sabbath on this day for all the days for all years to come.
Which a lot of Afrikaners still do.
I still do it. I know you still do it. So, I think those two elements really encapsulates what a South African is. Oh, not a South African. I almost made Ruan excited there. But no, what Afrikaner is, and the end result was the Afrikaners withstood the attack from the Zulus, withstood the onslaught, and actually didn't have any casualties, I think. So that's really the story of the Afrikaner to me. We will always be facing impossible odds, and the only way that we can overcome those odds is to, one, stand together, and two, trust in God, and put all our faith in God. And I think that's really what Afrikaner is to me. I think that really encapsulates the mythos of Afrikaner.
That's very important. I'm going to get to the next part of that question now. I just want to get here to Lynn Du Plessis sê dankie dat julle Afrikaans lewendig hou. Gesprekke soos die is baie belangrik. Ja, Lynn, ek wil net, as jy miskien laat ingeskakel het en vir enigiemand anders wat laat ingeskakel het, ek gaan nie dieselfde gesprek of 'n soortgelyke gesprek met Ruan ook op my Afrikaanse kanaal hê, so jy kan net gaan na In Alle Erns, soek dit op YouTube. Ek dink daar's 'n skakel in die description, maar as daar nie is nie, gaan soek net In Alle Erns. I will be having this conversation in Afrikaans as well within the coming weeks. I just need to find some time. So don't you worry, because I think this is important for not only English listeners, but Afrikaans listeners specifically, but Afrikaans listeners at least are smart enough to follow along with the English discussion. But you talked about the origin myths now, but maybe a last thing that we can end off on is heroes. I think heroes are also very important for a culture. I think it's something, I see a lot of cultures that lack heroes in their past, and they're suffering at the moment. They're really floundering. They don't know what to do. It's like if you ask a sports star, he will always have a hero. He'll always have someone that inspired him. And I think in culture, it works exactly the same way. You need those figures, whether they have been made larger than they were or not, through like playing telephone. I think there's a lot of true heroes in our history. Is there any that stand out to you that you think are very important?
Yeah, so I have a personal favorite Afrikaner hero. My favorite Afrikaner hero is M.T. Steyn, President M.T. Steyn from the Orange Free State. And I read his biography December, and yes, I instantly fell in love with the man. It's like no homo, but I fell in love with him. He's to me he's the epitome of what an Afrikaner man should strive to be. He's a God-fearing man. He was humble. He was cool and calculated. He had a great sense of humor. He was a family man and a person with a burning love for his folk. The book I read, the name of the book was Vader van sy volk, which translates to father of his folk. And that's really who Stein was. And he's someone I really tried to emulate. He was the president of the Orange Free State when the Second Boer War broke out. And I'm probably going to do a series about him on my channel soon. So stay tuned for that. But he's really someone that Afrikaner male should try to emulate. And then secondly, I think one that most people would look to is Japie Greiling. He from a young child, he was one of my favorite heroes. He was a young boy who during the Anglo-Boer War was cornered by the British soldiers, and they basically told him, Japie, basically life or death.
And he was 12 years old.
He was 12 years old. They told him, if you don't tell us where your father is and where the other Boers are, then we are going to kill you. And Japie stood there and he told the English soldier, well, then you have to shoot me, because I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to be a volksverraaier. I'm not going to split on my people and do something selfish to the detriment of my own people. And the English soldier was so taken back by this boy's bravery that he didn't kill him in the end. I think it's basically divine intervention there. But those are the type of heroes I look to, and I'm privileged to have as an Afrikaner. To have people like that in my culture or in my ethnicity or whatever. To look for inspiration on, and to try to strive to be more like them. So yeah, those are the two I really appreciate.
There's actually another part to that Japie Greiling story that really makes it excellent, and that's the fact that after the war, years later, that English officer wrote a book on Japie about this boy. I can't remember if it was a chapter in a book or the entire book was about him, but he wrote this piece of literature on him, and he contacted him after the war and asked him if he wants a copy, and he just flat out said, no, I don't want your book.
Oh, that's brilliant. No, that's brilliant.
It has a trolley end to the story as well. Japie was based.
No, based Japie. Gebaseerde Japie.
Yeah, I think it's so what you said there is spot on. And I think it's so important that you have someone to look to. And I think that's why the sportsman is such an apt example for it. Every guy that wants to compete, for example, on an Olympic level or Premier League level, has heroes that he looks to. But in terms of how they play the game, how they strategize, how they train, when it comes to culture, you look how people act, what their values are, what their morals are, what their principles are. So in the same way as someone in sport would look at training techniques and how they prepared for their role and how they got there, in culture it works exactly the same. You just look at a few different things. So I think it's absolutely crucial. And luckily we have a lot of heroes in our past. Afrikaner culture is actually very, very rich therein. So Ruan, we've actually reached the end of the episode now. It's absolutely flew by. I'm just checking my laptop battery now. I'm good. So final thoughts in regards to the whole conversation that we've had now, in regards, maybe if you just had a final message to young Afrikaners listening, what would you tell them?
Yeah, so I speak a lot to and about young Afrikaners on my podcast, and I would basically just tell these guys, you have so much to be proud of. You have so much in your heritage, in your culture, in your identity to be like extremely proud of. You're actually very rich. If you don't have any money, you're still one of the richest guys in the world, because you can tap so much out of that, and I'm so glad to be Afrikaner, because it's given me a lot. It's given me my Christian ethics. It's given me a really hardworking ethic, like that Protestant ethic they talk about. So um, I really am grateful and am blessed to be Afrikaner, and that's not something you should just throw away. I think that's something you should preserve. That's something you should really fight for in your everyday life. You are going to get challenges. The world isn't an easy place, and especially if you're Afrikaner, it's not going to be easy for you, and you are going to face a lot of enemies along the way. But you really have to prioritize what is important to you, what you want for your people, what you want for your children one day, and what you want to leave behind. What legacy do you want to leave behind? Are you going to be the next empty stain? Are you going to be a Japie Greiling? Or are you just going to throw it all away and be forgotten in the pages of history? So, I think you as a young Afrikaner have the privilege to be a large fish in a small sea. You can make history. You can protect your culture, if you just put your mind to it. If you have the right attitude. So that's what I'd say.
That's an excellent way to end it. If you are interested in Ruan Goosen's podcast that we talked about tonight, there's a link in the description. You can also go follow him on Twitter if you aren't already. We will also, just a reminder again, we will be having a similar conversation in Afrikaans on my channel, in Alle Erns. You can go check it out. It's on YouTube. It's also on every podcast platform that you use. So if you're not a video guy, it's going to be available there as well. So thank you very much, Ruan, for your time. Very excellent discussion. And I'm definitely going to have you on in the future so we can continue this, maybe culture, Afrikaner, culture part 2. But then also thank you very much to everyone that tuned in. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for... Oh, wait, I see... put it on. Thank you for your questions and your feedback in the chat. It really makes the conversation so much more interesting. It really adds to the content. You determine the content to a large extent. So thank you very much. I see here Wisdom Drop says, thank you, man, Patria, for connecting with CC. Oh, well, thank you, man, Patria, for having me on as a guest. I really enjoyed my chat. Also a chat about culture. So if you haven't seen that episode yet, go to them on Patria podcast. This is how you spell it. I'm just going to put it on the screen and type in Adams Van Sale. Or you can just go to their videos and sort by most viewed. It's number 1. And you can go listen there to our chat about
weird
culture.
flex. Okay.
All right. So cheers, guys. Have a good one. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I hope you're looking forward to the next culture episode. I will be announcing who I'm going to be talking to in this series very soon. So enjoy the rest of your evening. Cheers, everyone. Have a good one, and God bless.
Thanks.